Good morning. This morning we're going to look at one of the most important topics that arises out of the life of Moses. And as you'll see, it might just be, depending upon what you are like, the most personally difficult of all the issues we've looked at so far. And that is because it's dealing with Moses' issue, a lifelong issue of anger. And I don't mean righteous anger, I mean sinful anger. The Bible does not consider all anger sinful. Ephesians 4:26 says, "Be angry and yet do not sin." Righteous anger involves indignation towards sin, toward the things of the world that oppose God and his ways. And this is, because of the existence of righteous anger, why we see Christ acting in an angry manner. The best two examples, of course, are when Christ overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple, and the second one is in John 11, where Jesus saw that some women at Lazarus' funeral were distressing Mary and Martha by their false outpouring of sympathy and because they were making snide comments that Jesus could heal people, but he didn't bother to heal Lazarus, which, of course, was designed to hurt Mary and Martha. And when we see Jesus respond to those women, he gets angry, and it's righteous anger. We're told, quote, that he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. In the original Greek, this phrase actually means furious indignation. It was used, for example, of war horses snorting in anger just before charging in battle. But as I said, righteous anger is not the kind of anger that we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at the kind of anger that is the result of living in a fallen world with fallen emotions. Now, I've mentioned before that I've known a number of Navy SEALs, the elite of the elite in terms of special forces, and I remember this one particular incident involving a SEAL team. After one of my missions, my Navy flight crew and I went to the club on our base in Hawaii for dinner, and we noticed a whole table, about 8 guys, sitting at a table near us who were wearing white shirts with a small logo of a Navy trident on them. That's the symbol of SEALs. They were very quiet, and they were speaking to each other basically in whispers. They weren't bothering anyone, just enjoying each other's company. And I watched a drunk Marine walk up to the table and call the whole group of them a foul name, implying that they were all cowards. The 8 of them looked at each other calmly, and in turn, each one nodded to this one particular guy. And he stood up without a word, tore into that not too bright Marine, and within seconds had that man on the floor incapacitated and bleeding. I had never seen anything like it before or since. The SEAL then calmly went back to the table, sat down without a word, and they all resumed their conversation as though nothing had happened. There was no anger displayed, no crowing, no anything. It was as if the SEAL had just gotten up to order a drink, not pound someone into oblivion. Years later, when God used me to counsel a SEAL team that was struggling with guilt because they had killed so many people in battle, I became friends with the commanding officer of that team. Coincidentally, he was also the officer in charge of all of SEAL training. And I brought up this story to him. And he told me that he wasn't surprised because he said that the men were trained over and over again to control their anger and their fear, because anger and fear can make you easily lose control, and not good things happen when you're out of control. Fear, anger, depression, addiction, insecurity, self-doubt. We all have these inner demons, and when we let them, they have the power to control us and even haunt us for years. Well, Moses had an inner demon, and that's the demon of anger. And this morning's story that we're going to look at is a great example of how that demon got the best of him. The question before us today is going to be whether or not we have the courage to face our inner demons. I was reading a book written by a SEAL admiral about a month ago. I guess it's SEAL Sunday. And he said this: combat has a way of wearing you down. The fear eats at you every night. It whispers in your ear and plays on your worst nightmares. It takes remarkable courage to just get up in the morning and face the day. It takes even greater courage to face the day with enthusiasm, knowing the challenges and the risks that confront you. But real heroes do it because they found the courage to face their fears. And that courage steels their nerves and strengthens their resolve. But real courage is not the sole purview of warriors. Far from it. I've seen equal acts of heroism from doctors, police patrolling the streets, firefighters rushing into collapsing buildings, parents protecting their children. Sometimes, however, the physical courage to face the enemies of the nation pales in comparison to the courage necessary to take on the enemies within. We all have fears that keep us from being courageous, but all you have to do is to overcome those fears, those obstacles, those challenges, is to take one step forward. Just one. And if you take that one step forward, you'll find the courage you seek. Now, that man understands something about courage, of course, and the human component to overcoming fear and negative emotions like anger. And that's great, but he doesn't understand that as believers, we have something that I'm assuming he hasn't experienced because he never mentions it. We have God, and he's with us every step of the way. We don't take that first step alone. For example, look at what God tells the whole nation of Israel in Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Surely I will help you. Surely I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. The Apostle Paul also gets this because he says in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You see, we don't take that one step alone or in our own power. We step out with God. And I'll explain why this is critically important in respect to today's topic a little later. We see examples of the importance of God's presence, this being with us, all over the Bible. God promised to be with Moses when he went to Egypt. David knew that God was with him when he wrote Psalm 23:4, where it says, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Joshua was told in Joshua 1:9, Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And you and I have the explicit promise in Hebrews 13:5 that Jesus will never leave us nor forsake us. He is always with us. But even though God goes with us, the reality is that sometimes we still struggle with negative emotions. The process of becoming like Christ is just that. It's a process. All our issues don't go away the moment we put our faith in Christ. And that was certainly true for Moses. As I said, he had this lifelong struggle with anger, this inner demon, and it was powerful. Maybe you share the same one. We first saw Moses' anger when he murdered an Egyptian taskmaster who was abusing a Hebrew slave. Next, we saw it when Moses had to tell Pharaoh about all the death that was coming on the Passover night, and Pharaoh still refused to follow God and God's will in that matter, and so thousands and thousands of people died. And Exodus 11:8 tells us that when Moses left that encounter with Pharaoh, he left with, quote, hot anger. Psalm 106 tells us that the people provoked Moses' wrath when they didn't have water at Meribah and they grumbled against him. And then a few weeks ago, we saw it again when Moses got angry at seeing the people worship the golden calf, and he smashed the 2 tablets upon which God had written the law. Some of these events have some aspect of righteous anger to them, but the point is well taken, that Moses had frequent bouts of anger, sometimes uncontrollable anger, anger that led to murder and lashing out. Now, Numbers 20 records the last bout with anger that he experienced. Let's look at it. Numbers 20, verses 1 to 12. Then the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried there. There was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink." So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, "Listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water from you out of this rock?" Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you have not believed me, to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." There's a couple of things in these verses I think we should notice right off the bat. First of all, verse 1 tells us that Miriam has just died. Aren't you vulnerable to strong emotions and maybe even lose control with your emotions when someone close to you passes? And second, did you notice that the people assembled against Moses and Aaron? That's an aggressive, threatening stance that the people were taking. If you remember, the people did this to Aaron, which intimidated him into making the golden calf. In our passage, Moses tries at first to obey God. He sets out to do the right thing. Verse 9 says that Moses took the rod from before the Lord just as he commanded him. But then he, for some reason, disobeys God's word, which was just to hold the rod and speak to the rock. And instead he lashes out by calling everyone a name, rebels. And then he strikes the rock twice, not just once, twice. Somehow I think that's important. Twice says that he was really, really angry, and he didn't care about doing what God had said because his anger got control over him. Maybe he did this to at least point out to the people how angry he was. Ever heard of a man punching a wall with his fist as an expression of the people around him, how angry he is, kind of showing them that he really wanted to hit them? Maybe that's what Moses was doing. God was trying to show this obstinate people mercy. He's going to give them water. But Moses wanted a little bit of revenge for all the hurt that they have caused him. Anger, like stress, can be cumulative. It can build up and build up until we explode. I think Miriam's death, plus the frustration, finally built up to the point where he couldn't control himself anymore. I believe he wanted the people to recognize how horrible they were as a means of revenge. But that didn't achieve what God wanted. God could have told him to chastise the people, but he didn't. God just wanted to give them some water. Now, I want to do something a little unusual at this point and pause to show you a video. Now, you may have to turn the volume up on your TV to catch it, but just watch. I'm not going to set this up.
I'm done. This is getting absurd. They're raising our property taxes again. Why? Why? One look at our neighbor's house and they'll see that value around here is going down real fast. I mean, do John and what's her face even know how to take care of our home? Maybe paint the exterior every once in a while, you know? They have a brand new lawnmower just sitting in the garage. I would love a lawnmower like that. But no, I have to have the kind that you have to hope and pray that it starts every time that you pull the cord. Everything around here is just breaking. I've asked the kids a dozen times to pick stuff up, but there's crumbs everywhere, there's soda cans, there's laundry on the floor, and it's not just in their rooms, okay? I saw a sock in the hallway. There's a t-shirt on the dining room table. I mean, are they even listening to us? Oh, and by the way, The fees for the ballet lessons, they're due. Let's have fun with that conversation, shall we? Sorry, sweet girl, your ballet dreams can't come true because mom and dad can't pay. This house that you wanted, it is breaking down by the minute, and now it's too expensive for us to live in.
Who hurt you?
What?
Who hurt you?
A lot of people. And I guess it's messing with me.
Who hurt you? Have you ever heard the expression, hurt people hurt people? Well, in terms of anger, hurt people often cope by lashing out. Can't keep those emotions bottled up inside. They're critical and negative, like the man we saw in the video. They have all these negative emotions that are begging for expression, and so they come out. Well, Moses, who hurt you? Or what hurt you? Where did your anger come from? Did you resent being separated from your parents and siblings and raised by a people who were oppressing your family, your friends, your relatives, your people? Did that resentment fester, and turn into anger? Was it Pharaoh who hurt you by not listening to you and thousands of people died unnecessarily? Was it Aaron or Miriam who later in life resented God's attention towards you? Was it the people? These people that you were called to lead and serve. People who criticized practically everything you ever did, even though you did those things for them. Or was it everyone above? Or Moses? Was it God himself? Was it the whole thing, the job God wanted you to do, this lot in life he chose for you, a lot you didn't choose, didn't ask for, and didn't want? The lot he forced on you? Was it his expectations, his demands, the way he made everything so difficult? Did he hurt you? And what about you, Christian? If you struggle with anger and you're not sure why, if you lash out and have to criticize everything and everybody, like the man in the video, has someone hurt you? And your circumstances, are they similar to Moses in the sense that God has given you circumstances you didn't ask for and didn't want? Circumstances that cry out from your perspective that God doesn't care or has something against you? How many times have I counseled people whose mate cheated and left them, and they were hurt and angry and wondering how God could let this happen? How many hospital rooms have I visited where people were angry at God because of how he took someone they loved? How many people in yours or my life are angry because someone has done them wrong? Someone has hurt them. Maybe God himself, at least in terms of their feelings, is thought to have hurt them. But here's the rub. The longer we've lived in the Christian subculture, the more likely we are to dismiss the very idea that we're angry with God. That thought is just wrong, because we know that he's perfect. So we shove that anger because we feel like it's wrong to be angry. We shove it down deep. It's unacceptable to be angry with God because we know that God's loving. We know that he sent Jesus to die for us, something we didn't deserve. So how could we be angry at someone like that? And yes, of course, theologically, we have no logical reason to be angry with God, but anger isn't logical. It's primarily feeling-based. and you can't always control your feelings. Is it possible to be angry with someone who doesn't deserve it? You bet. But God understands. The fact is that if we swallow and ignore and deny that we have anger towards God and pretend that it just doesn't exist because it's unacceptable, that anger gets manifested in some way. It doesn't just go away magically because we refuse to believe it exists, or we pushed it so far down deep. Sometimes because we think it's just not spiritual to be angry, especially angry toward God. We can't even bring ourselves to admit that we're angry. So we say we're frustrated. We're not angry, we're frustrated. And all that lashing out that the man in the video did was misdirected. That's what we do. We misdirect our anger. We may be really angry with God, but it shows up not as anger toward God. It's anger towards those moronic drivers on the 202 who are driving over 100 miles an hour and endangering everybody's lives. I digress. Or it's lashing out in criticism or thinly veiled sarcasm at someone in our family who has let us down. The hurt comes out somehow, somewhere, and we rage, and we yell, and we do harm to our psyche and to our bodies with all that negative stress. I've seen this idea of anger misdirection in marriage counseling. The woman is frustrated with her husband, and it's never really about the sock on the floor that he left for the umpteenth time. Her angry feelings are really about the inconsideration and inattention to her emotional needs. It's not about the sock. And with God, it's sometimes not about the things we criticize, the things we pour our anger about. We misdirect that anger towards God onto things or people. The songs that we sing in church, the church itself, the way we do or don't do ministry. It becomes about everything that doesn't measure up to our expectations when it's really about someone you feel has hurt you. It becomes about this misdirected anger toward God, about things that don't measure up to our expectations. Family, work, life. These things are the socks on the floor when the anger is really with God. Repressed anger, anger that we stuff deep down because it's somehow not acceptable, doesn't go dormant. It's got to find an expression somewhere, so it turns into something else. Either depression, which is anger turned inward, expressing anger at ourselves instead of at the person we're really angry with, or it turns into lashing out, anger turned outward, expressing anger by blaming or criticizing. You may be angry almost all the time and not know why because of misdirected anger. Who hurt you? And so bottom line, what do we do about this issue? We have some options. We have a destructive alternative in which we stew and stew and stew, or we can seek ways to cope negatively by escaping from all those negative feelings, by drinking the feelings away, or we can sabotage our relationships, or kick the dog, or criticize and complain all the time and drive people away with our negativity. Or we can go to the positive side and do the hardest thing of all, forgive. Forgive the people who've hurt us. Even forgiving God, who doesn't really need our forgiveness, but we need to let our resentment go through the process of forgiving him. And maybe, just maybe, you have to forgive yourself. Is it possible that you are the one who's hurt you? Are you angry because you failed? You've let people down. You didn't live the perfect life of a Christian, this life you think you're supposed to live. But there's another thing we can do. And let me introduce it to you by asking you this question. What do demons primarily do, Satan in particular? they lie to you. The inner demon of anger, so to speak, lies to you. Do you listen to him? Sinful anger says to you that your rights are the most important things in the world. And when you believe that your rights are not being met, that leads you to angry feelings and resentment and thoughts. Anger tempts us to think and act in ways that eat away at us and demand that things go our way. And when things don't go our way, we're frustrated. And this is why we could so easily get hurt by God, at least in terms of our feelings and sometimes our thoughts. Because we feel like he's not doing what it takes to make things right for us. Because we have these expectations of how things are supposed to go, and when they don't go that way, somebody's to blame. So dealing with anger, especially spiritually, sometimes involves what Paul describes himself doing in Galatians 2:20 and Philippians 2:3. Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. In Philippians 2:3, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. We can deal with anger by releasing our rights to our old life. The right to have life the way we think it ought to be. If we believe that our old lives, these lives that we used to live for ourselves, are gone, they're dead, crucified, and the life we're now living is lived for God's glory and not the pursuit of what we think life owes us, then we accept God's will, even difficult circumstances, without the feeling that he's depriving us of something that we're owed. And doing this, by getting our eyes off of ourselves, off of our expectations, allows us to put our eyes on other people, and that allows us to consider their needs as more important than our own. And that positive action dispels anger. I also believe that Paul used that word crucified in this verse on purpose to say that our old lives did not die easily. They were tortured to death. The passing away of that life, all those expectations, all those demands, was not easy. And it caused us pain. And it didn't happen in an instant. Crucifixion takes a while. Giving up our rights to have life the way we want it isn't easy. And having this attitude, which allows us to then direct our activities towards the needs of others, was never meant to be easy. It's a work of God, not a work of man. God can make this happen in our lives, but we can't make it happen through our own strength. This is why I said earlier that it's critically important that we understand the importance of the fact that God is with us, because we will not deal with anger spiritually, successfully, unless we walk that journey in peace with God. Numbers 20 related to us this final episode of Moses' anger. And this time, God decides when he struck the rock, enough is enough. And he disciplines Moses for it. I don't think it was because Moses struggled with anger that he was disciplined. I believe he was disciplined because he allowed his anger to affect his obedience to God. And God's discipline on him is very tough. He's decided that Moses' anger has become destructive to what he's called him to do, and he's not going to allow him as a result to enter the promised land and complete what God had wanted him to do. And that should serve as a warning to you and me. James speaks to the seriousness of this when he says in James 1:19-20, this you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Can you use a small break from the seriousness of this topic? I know I can. Let's lighten things up for a moment. Let me tell you a story about anger. In his autobiography, number 1, baseball manager Billy Martin tells a story about hunting in Texas with Mickey Mantle. Now, Mickey had a friend who used to let him hunt on his property, so Mickey decided to take Billy out there and ask for permission to hunt. So they drove out to Mickey's friend's ranch, and Mickey told Billy, "You wait in the car, I'll go ask him for permission." So Mickey rang the bell, and his friend answered the door, and when asked, he said, "Well, of course you can hunt." But then he asked Mickey for a favor. It seems that this guy had a favorite mule out in the barn that was sick enough to have to be put down, but he couldn't bring himself to do it because of how much he cared about that mule. So he asked Mickey, "Would you put that mule down for me?" So Mickey comes back to the car, and on the way back to the car, he decided to play a practical joke on Billy. So he pretended to be really angry. He scowled and slammed the door and said, "I'm so mad at that guy, he's not going to let us hunt. I'm going to go out to his barn and shoot one of his mules." "You can't do that," Billy said in horror. "You just watch me." And Mickey grabbed a rifle, ran inside the barn, and put down the mule. Just as he was leaving, though, Mickey heard 2 more shots ring out. He ran out of the barn and saw Billy standing there with a rifle in his hand. "What are you doing, Billy?" Mickey yelled, and Billy yelled back, "We'll show him. I just killed 2 of his cows." All right, now seriously, when have you ever seen sinful anger create something that God uses for his glory? The anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Anger makes things worse, not better. And the Greek word for anger that James uses in this passage means wrath. It's the kind of anger that is the reactionary buildup of rage that eventually has to burst out. And in the Bible, this kind of anger is usually associated with a desire for revenge that ultimately gets expressed. Now, coming back to this question, has somebody hurt you? I mean, really hurt you? Through abuse, betrayal, gossip, or the like? And your feelings of the injustice of it all, because nothing made it right, have overwhelmed you? And inside, this anger, this wrath that James is referring to, builds and builds and builds until you become an angry soul. Because you're not getting what you expect. You're not getting justice. And these feelings of injustice overwhelm you. Those feelings, even though to some degree they're justified, is what James is warning us about. Because those things don't achieve the righteousness of God. They don't get us to where we want them to get us. They just build more anger. These angry, revengeful attitudes, they're not the things that reflect Christ. Because he forgave those who hurt him. There was no justice in it. He even forgave those who tortured him to death. And God is calling upon us, if we're going to spiritually deal with our anger, to do what, humanly speaking, is very hard to do. It's so much easier to boil up in anger, to vent that anger, to call people names, to curse them and trash them to others. It's so much easier to give into these feelings of resentment and indignation and hurt pride and fume than to forgive and seek to understand the other person by listening first, as James tells us to do. It's so much easier to get passive aggressive and give people the silent treatment or banish them. It's so much easier to stomp off, spout off, yell and throw a tantrum than to be slow to speak. I also think there's something else we need to keep in mind as we look at Moses and his anger. When we look at anybody in the Bible, really, and that's this: we are all imperfect. Moses is like David or Peter. All of us, really. He's just like us. He's not all good. He's not all bad. We've looked at Moses' life from all sides around. His insecurity, his fear, immaturity. But then we saw God work in his life, and we saw his courage, commitment, compassion, and serving humility. He ends up humble. He still struggles with anger his entire life, but he ends up humble. And he put the needs of others before his own. So no matter how we approach Moses' character issues, this one in particular, it's valuable that we take the log out of our own eyes and not judge someone else's spirituality, whether they are biblical figures or someone sitting right next to us in the pew. The striking of the rock in anger illustrates for us that when we want to achieve the righteousness of God, we don't fight with the weapons of the world, and the weapons of the world are anger and revenge, violence and punishment. But the weapons of God are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. We can't always control our feelings, especially anger, from rising up, but we can control what we do with them. And we can seek to live lives crucified that don't demand that God meets our expectations, because it's this failure to meet our expectations that causes all the indignation. If our anger is channeled into acting the way that Christ would act, then the things of God have a chance to happen. My prayer for you and me is that we become progressively more like people who look like Christ, who did not live according to his own agenda. He did not live according to his own agenda. He lived according to God's, and he was crucified. Paul decided, I'm not going to live for my own agenda. I'm going to be crucified. These qualities of peace, patience, kindness, self-control, these are qualities that are opposed to anger. This topic is a big deal to God and a big deal to us. If we're going to represent Christ and experience the life and the joy that he wants us to experience, the abundant life promised in John 10:10, we need to deal with the hurt that brings about all this anger in our lives and forgive those who have hurt us and release our right to have our own will. Moses has lost out, not on God's love, but in the end, by not being allowed to enter the promised land, he lost out on all that God had wanted him to experience. Maybe you and I are losing out on some of what God has for us because he can't give some of these blessings to someone who'll burn them up with resentment and anger. Resentment and anger serve only to hurt us. It's trying to shoot someone else with a gun that's pointed at us. We fire and the bullet only wounds us. So I pray for you and me this morning that we decide to take that one step forward, but to take it with God, relying on him for the strength to do it. And that one step is to forgive. Forgive those who have hurt us, even if we feel that's God himself. Even if it's you that you need to forgive. God understands, and he will go on this journey with us. Let's pray. So, Father, indeed, this is a difficult issue for me and for many who are listening to me. And even for those who don't struggle so much with anger, but they know someone who does. We pray that you would help all of us who have this need to take that one step, a step of forgiveness. But we know we can't do it in our own strength. We need you. We trust you, love you, and know that you are true to your word and that you forgive us. Help us to forgive those who have hurt us. And we pray this in your Son's name. Amen.